In this video, I'm going to be talking about shipworms. Shipworms are called teredo. Now, teredo, they are clams. They look like worms, but they're actually clams. And these clams live inside of trees. They burrow into wood. They burrow into boats. They actually also burrow into stone. So these shipworms have this very powerful mouth, and they have these two valves that burrow into wood, and they actually eat wood, and they digest wood in the cecum, which is like a gut. Very important terms to describe these shipworms in our history. That's a very important thing, and I think it's very relatable to Hollywood. You think of Hollywood and shipworms, and I'll talk about that later in this presentation. So we're going to spend some time looking at shipworms, and that's what we're going to do now. We're just going to look at images of pictures and shipworms, and that's what you're seeing now is shipworms, especially the mouth of shipworms. And look at the mouth of these shipworms, and compare it to the idea of for instance, the CBS logo of the eye, and the idea of the compass and square of Freemasonry. You're going to see a lot of interesting connections here, and I do believe these shipworms live inside of the human body and actually help create the human body, along with snails. And I've talked about this in the past, how snails live inside your knees. There's and other areas as well. There's the idea of your kneecaps are called patellas, and that's a species of snails. Limpets are snails, and they live there. And if you hold a magnifying glass up to like knee bones, you're going to see some incredible supernatural spiritual images there. And when you study the anatomy of shipworms, you're going to see some incredible connections with other things, other incredible symbols as well, like the fleur-de-lis and the Pope's mitre. If you look at the Pope's mitre and you compare it to the pellets that are on the shipworm, a very important connection there. And of course, the ancient Rome, one of the powers of Rome, one of the power areas of Rome was on Palatine Hill. And when you look at the word Palatine and you compare it to pallets and look at the Pope's mitre, very important connections there. And the idea of a holy see. So, and again, we're going to talk about this in greater detail. I'm just trying to show some images now. And we're going to talk about, again, Hollywood and Druids. And Druids are known as the knowers of the oaks, And these things live inside of wood, and they eat wood, and they bore holes in wood. And the idea of masonry, if you look up mason and you look up the etymology of the word mason, you come across lithodomus. And that means living in rocks. And these shipworms live in rocks. So very important connection between shipworms and Freemasonry and the secrets that are, these secret organizations that just run our lives. And it's important to look at this and get the reasons why these organizations act in secret. Because possibly people are not made of what we think we are. Humans are not made of what we imagine we are. If you look at snails and you look at clams, it's more likely that we're made of these kind of things. A collection of these mollusks and gastropods. One of the most incredible things you're going to find when you start studying shipworms and gastropods is the idea that a lot of these species have what's called a gastric shield. Now, a gastric shield, I'll go to Wikipedia and I'll read what it says. A gastric shield is an organ in the digestive tract of bivalves, tusk shells, and some gastropods against which a crystalline style typically rotates in an action resembling that of a mortar and pestle. The more you study the gastric shield inside of these shipworms, the more you're going to see that it has everything to do with the Hollywood motion picture industry. I said in an earlier video that when you study snails, you're going to see that has a lot to do with Hollywood as well. So this connection between shipworms and snails is a lot to do with our lives. I believe inside of us as well, we're going to find snails and shipworms as well. Like, it's part of our intestinal tract. It's part of our knees. Remember, our kneecaps are called patella. Now, patella is another word for snail. So that's very interesting. But this shield that's inside of these shipworms, I believe there's a motion picture being broadcasted on that shield, this gastric shield. Because when you look up the word shield, you're going to get screen. That's what shields are, screens. And that's what a screenplay is. You know, a screenplay is in a way a shield, right? Because you have a screenplay, and then, of course, the silver screen, what you watch a movie on, is called the screen. So that's the gastric shield of a shipworm, because food actually comes back to life on this shield. And the more you look up the word silver, like silver screen, and you compare it to words like sylvan. When you look up sylvan on etymology websites, you're going to see sylvan. It says of the woods. What we're looking at now is pictures of the crystalline style. And this crystalline style rotates around the gastric shield, almost like a record player. Again, brings back to life spiritual beings. And it's a motion picture going on here, or a record, or actually sound. Think of a phonograph or a record player. It's the idea of bringing back to life images and audio recordings. The idea of record. Now, the crystalline style, you look at the idea of christening a ship. So we're going to look at pictures here of christening a ship, or the idea of this crystal or a mason jar. Do you see this idea of this jar here? As you're studying shipworms and snails, you're going to see a connection to the human body. Now, inside the human body, we have approximately 600 muscles. Now, keep in mind, shipworms are clams, and clams are of the mollusk family. But if you look up the word mussel, M-U-S-S-E-L, you'll also get the word M-U-S-C-L-E. So that's interesting. And mussels are mollusks. When you research the word bone, you're going to come across the word ost or osteon. And osteon has a lot to do with oysters. So oysters and bones, and oysters, again, are of the mollusk family. Also, you look up the word patella. Now, your kneecaps are called patella, but patella is limpets, snails. That's what the patellas are. There's even a species called the patellidae. There's a lot of good research going on showing that the Earth is flat. If you're studying flat Earth videos, you may also want to look at world turtle. World turtle is the idea, it's an old creation myth, showing that the Earth is actually on the shell of a giant turtle. Now, the world turtle, I believe, is a symbol for a giant snail. If you look at the word turtle, which I talked about in an earlier video, that it's interrelated with snail. And I'm going to show images of world turtle. There's another creation myth you also may want to research, and that's the Ouroboros. Now, the Ouroboros is the idea or the creation myth of a giant serpent eating its own tail, as a representation of like infinity, also of the universe. And the Ouroboros, I believe, is actually the shipworm. So you're seeing now Ouroboros. And now if you put the world turtle together with the Ouroboros, you're going to see that this is possibly the universe. And there's actually some good illustrations of the world turtle with the Ouroboros. And the Ouroboros is like coming out of the throat of the world turtle. If you've ever read the Stephen Hawking book, Brief History of Time, on the very first page, Mr. Hawking talks about the world turtle as the idea of a turtle's all the way down. In other words, a stack of turtles, which are like a stack of snails, as the universe, as a representation of the universe. And he doesn't say it's not true. He says that could possibly be the way it is if you read the first page of the Brief History of Time book. And we're going to take a moment out. We're going to look at some Bible passages that the earth actually has a mouth. And if you go to Numbers chapter 16, verse 30, it says, "But if the Lord make a new thing, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed them up." So right off the bat, you should be looking at the Bible as proof that the earth is a living organism. And if you go to Numbers chapter 16, verse 32, it says, "And the earth opened her mouth and swallowed them up." Okay, and we're going to go to Revelation chapter 12, verse 16. And it says, "And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon cast out of his mouth." So what I'm showing now is the scarab beetle. And the scarab beetle represented the sun in ancient Egyptian culture. But if you study the word scarab, it's going to lead to snail as well. And snails have a lot to do with the sun. There's something called heliculture, and heliculture is snail farming. And heli is another word for the sun. A true representation of the universe might be a giant shipworm attached to the throat of a giant snail. And the idea here is a regeneration process. So we might be living inside the mouth of a giant snail. And the idea of the snail and the shipworm attached is a way of creating this infinite process. In other words, inside the snail's mouth, there's a track, a long track, and it's called the radula. And this track is made of goethite. And if you study the word goethite, it's actually going to lead to the word God, which is very interesting, I believe. As I've said in previous videos, the snail that creates the universe, I believe, is the limpet snail. And if you study the word limpet, it's going to mean lamb rock. That's what the word limpet means. And remember, your kneecaps are called patella, and patella is another word for limpets. So we have snails inside of us. And if you don't think so, you look at a medical dictionary and you'll see protein terms for snail, like snail 1 is a protein, and that helps create stem cells inside our body. As I said earlier, the word muscles and muscles, muscles are interchangeable, and mussels are mollusks. And if you look up the word bones, you're going to get osteon, and that means oyster. So people are not made of what we think we are, and that's why our masters or the powers that run our reality can manipulate us, because our insides are not what we think they are. Some other key words to look at are related to shipworms. Now, shipworms are called teredo. Now, shipworms are also called turo, T-U-R-U. Look at the closeness of turo and Torah and tarot cards, because another word for shipworms is tarot, and that's almost tarot cards. Also bank and bankia. Now, bankia is another shipworm. And very important is the word mayada. Now, mayada, if you look in other languages, that means media. So the media is completely related to shipworms. Also, when you study the words for medical, you're going to see a very close relation to mayada and the word news. Now, news has a lot to do with sheep, E-W-S, and you look up E-W-E as sheep. And I've said in previous videos, sheep are the snails. Limpets mean lamb rocks. Look up rod of Asclepius. Now, rod of Asclepius is a worm wrapped around a staff. This image could be found on the back of a snail, a back of a limpet. I'm going to show that. This is the back of a limpet snail. And that's the symbol for the medical industry. I'm going to close this video by showing one more image, and that's a pantograph. And a pantograph is a tool for copying. It's in other words, a duplication process tool. And if you look closely, it looks very much like that square and compass of Freemasonry, and almost identical to the mouth of a shipworm. And that's possibly the goal of these giant shipworms, or a giant shipworm that lives under the earth, and that's to make a duplicate version of ourselves. So when you think about secret powers that run our reality, remember the word lithodomus. Lithodomus is masons, and lithodomus is meaning that living in rocks, and that's what these shipworms are. So shipworms might actually be the powers that run our reality in many ways.